Okay, on to a new section. Section 4, Contributing Factors. Let your guard down or look away, and life can turn in a single day. Chapter 18, Escalated. The trip back to the Warrens was the longest of Archer's life, 1 hour, 13 minutes, and 43 seconds. He knew because the second they had left the Olsons, Archer was so angry he couldn't bring himself to look at Jodi. So he alternated from the road to the speedometer to the clock on the dashboard. He wasn't sure which he felt more, anger at her family or pain for her. He also didn't trust himself to speak because he knew once he started, he wouldn't be able to stop. He knew he couldn't rant about her family because he didn't want to criticize them in front of her kids. Fact was, he wasn't even sure if Jodi would tolerate his venting, since she seemed to accept their behavior as normal. He knew they had upset her, but except for the habitual blinking, she didn't show it. So he simply drove and kept quiet, as he had yearned for the highway to magically propel him forward like a time machine. He needed to drop everyone off, go home, have a drink, and try to figure out what the hell had happened. Archer pulled into the Warren driveway after the longest drive of his life, but simply asked, "Are you going to be okay getting inside by yourself?" "I kind of have to get home." He waited for the family to get out, anxious to leave, not really waiting for an answer. "I'll wait until you're in the house, okay?" "No, you don't have to. A light is on, so Audra must be home. Thanks for taking us today. I really appreciate it. I enjoyed the day." Jodi was addressing him, but not looking him in the eyes. The kids had gotten out and headed for the front door, all of them subdued, even Dela, as if his bad mood had been an oppressive layer of fog engulfing the interior of the car and had smothered everyone into silence. No one said goodbye as he drove away. It was just as well, he thought. Jodi, "You kids go on and get ready for bed now. I'm going to see how Audra is doing." Jodi ordered softly as they walked into the house, even though they didn't need any prodding and had already headed for their individual rooms. Jodi walked into the kitchen to check on her oldest daughter, glad she was home before 11 for a change. Instead of finding Audra as she expected, she was met by Tony sitting at the table, pushing an empty cup from one hand to the other like a ball at a tennis match. The look on her face told Jodi her day wasn't over. "Tony?" "Hi, Jodi. I've been waiting for you. Audra gave me a key. I hope you don't mind." "No, I don't mind. Why would Audra need to give you a key, though? Where is she? Is she in her room?" "Jodi, sit down. Let's talk." The inflection in Tony's voice had Jodi's maternal instinct jumping. "Okay, in a minute. I need to see Audra." Jodi turned to leave the room, anxiety swallowing her courage. Tony turned in her chair and faced Jodi head on. "Jodi, wait. I need to talk to you." Jodi stopped and turned to face her friend. The look on Tony's face was haggard with sadness smudging her eyes. "Tony, you're scaring me. What's going on?" "All right, I can tell I'm upsetting you. First thing I have to tell you is Audra is okay, but she's in the hospital. She has a bad sprain on her left arm and some bruises on her body." Haltingly, she added, "and she may have a concussion. The doctor wants to keep her overnight for observation." "Wait, what? What are you talking about? The hospital?" In a flash, Jodi's chest started hurting. She was still raw from the dinner with her family, and now this. She wasn't sure she could handle it. Her breathing became labored. She swayed slightly, thinking she was going to faint. "Jodi, sit down before you fall down and let me explain." Tony stood up, ready to guide Jodi to a kitchen chair. Jodi could feel the panic clawing through her insides like it was on fire. "The hospital. I need to go see her. Wait, what happened? No, tell me on the way. Why didn't someone call me?" She became disoriented from the pressure of trying to think rationally. Where were her keys? She needed her car keys. Doug, she had to call Doug. Yes, Doug needed to know. Wait, the kids. She needed someone to watch her children. Lexi is old enough. I gotta talk to Lexi. She couldn't think. The confusion of what to do was robbing her of any coherent thought. She started turning in semicircles, trying to decide what to do first. like a caged bird prancing back and forth on a perch. Tony stepped forward and grabbed Jodi by the shoulders, forcing her to stop. "Jodi, stop. She's okay. I just left her about half an hour ago. She's probably asleep right now, and I need to explain everything to you. First, I want you to slow down your breathing. Can you do that?" Jodi was so dazed that Tony taking control seemed to help. It was what Jodi needed to calm down, someone to tell her what to do so she could focus. Yes, I'll do that. Just tell me what happened," she insisted as the pitch of her voice grew higher. "Was she in an accident or something?" "Jodi, Audra was beaten up by Travis." "What? No, that can't be." "I know your suspected Travis has been abusing Audra for a while now. Like all abusers, he's gotten more violent, and this time he went too far. I was on duty when I got the call. I met her at the hospital and waited until she was seen." "What did he do to her?" "Well, now that part is a little more difficult to explain because Audra won't tell us." "Wait, what are you talking about? If she didn't tell you what happened, then how do you know Travis beat her up?" Sorry. "Because I've been doing this a long time, and I know the signs when a girl has been abused, as do the doctors. Let me explain, okay? I was called out to the skating rink about 9 o'clock. The police were called out on a public disturbance, but when they got there, they found a girl crying. She was clutching her arm and her stomach and covered in bruises. They suspected she'd been beaten up, so they called me because it's standard procedure to call out a victim advocate. It was Audra. She wouldn't tell them what happened, but another girl at the rink, I guess she's a friend of Audra and Travis's, said they had been arguing. They saw Travis drag Audra outside and around the building. By the time everyone else ran outside to find them, Travis was headed back into the building, and Audra was standing by the car, doubled over, crying. Because of the marks on her body, I took her to the hospital to be checked out. She wouldn't confirm anything, and it was a struggle to even get her to agree to go to the hospital. When I asked her what happened, she said she fell down in the dark and hit her head on the side of the building." "What did Travis say happened?" "Travis said the same thing, that she fell down." "I still don't understand. If they both said she fell down, why do you think Travis beat her up?" "Because the doctors know, as well as I do, that you don't get injuries like she's got from falling down. Her arm shows signs of being wrenched, like someone grabbed it and twisted it in different directions. I think they call it an Indian burn or something. The bruises on her neck and back are not consistent with a fall, plus some of them are fairly old. I also think he punched her in the stomach the way she was clutching it." "Is she okay? Tell me she's going to be okay." "She'll be fine. She'll just need some rest when you get her home and some understanding. And she needs to stay away from Travis." "Isn't he in jail?" "No, Jodi, he's not in jail, and he won't be going to jail. Like I said, Audra won't confirm anything he did to her, and without her bringing charges against him, the police can't do anything." "Then I'll talk to her myself." "When you bring her home in the morning, you can talk to her, and you should. But legally, there is nothing that can be done because she hasn't accused Travis of doing anything wrong. Jodi, the only reason I'm telling you what happened in the first place is because she's in the hospital and you're going to have to pick her up in the morning. So I wanted to warn you. But she's going to tell you she fell down. But if I didn't tell you, you probably wouldn't know what that Travis had anything to do with it. You're a friend and I care about Audra, but she asked me not to tell you, and I pretty much shouldn't have, even though she's a minor. But I reasoned with her that because of her injuries, was no way you would believe that someone didn't do this to her. The doctors are bound to tell you their theory too. Do you understand? If my superior finds out I treated a close friend and didn't keep a victim's confidence, I could be dismissed. In any other circumstance, I wouldn't say a word because of the confidentiality I promised my victims. This isn't right. He's going to get away with hurting my daughter? The only thing I can tell you is that you need to convince Audra to break it off with him or bring charges against him, or it will get worse." They stood staring at each other as if their minds could not reconcile the situation. With a final sigh, Tony said, "Why don't I go with you in the morning to pick her up, and we'll talk to her together? Just let her sleep tonight, and you try and get some sleep. Things will be better in the morning if you both get some rest. How's that sound?" Sleep. Right. It's best if she sleeps. And thanks, Tony, for offering to go with me to pick her up. But I think this is something I need to do myself. If I can't get anywhere with her, I'll call you and have you talk to her again. Right now I need to call the hospital and check on her. Then I have to call Doug. She needed to get Tony to leave because she could feel her heart rate increasing, beating in rhythm to her rising panic. She didn't know how long she could hold it together, and she didn't want Tony to know of her panic attacks. Do you want me to hang around while you do it? No, that's all right. But if you don't mind, if I need to talk to you tonight, can I call you? Of course, honey, any time. I'm going to go home now and give you some privacy. She headed for the front door, but stopped suddenly when she saw Lexi standing in the hall. The pale look on the girl's face had Tony stopping in her tracks. Lexi, are you okay? Lexi ignored Tony and turned to her mother. Mom, is something wrong with Audra? Jodi hesitated, answering her, not sure how much she should reveal. Eventually she replied, I'm afraid so. She's in the hospital and Tony thinks Travis hurt her. Tony took the chance of finding out the truth. Lexi, do you know if Travis has ever hurt Audra before? No, but I've suspected. Once I saw some bruises on her back, and when I asked her how she got them, she said I wouldn't understand because I don't have a boyfriend. Is she going to be okay? She asked, worriedly looking at her mother. Of course, sweetie. I'm going to pick her up in the morning, and Tony is going to help me talk to her. Jodi's voice was a squeak as she tried desperately to control her anxiety. Lexi, Audra is saying Travis didn't do anything, so you don't tell her we suspect anything. If it got out that Travis hurt Audra without a formal charge, there could be legal repercussions. You understand? Tony warned. Yes, with that one simple word, Lexi turned and went down the hall and into the bathroom. Tony watched as Jodi went into the kitchen to phone Doug, and then walked down the hall to see if Lexi needed help. Seeing that the door was slightly open, Tony started to knock when she peeked through the crack of the door and watched as Lexi stuck her finger down her throat and threw up. Stepping quickly back into the shadow of the hall, Tony looked toward the kitchen to where Jodi was, and then back into the bathroom to see Lexi sitting beside the toilet. Tony simply shook her head, as if deciding if Jodi could take any more trauma for one night. She simply turned and slowly walked to the front door and let herself out as Jodi's high-pitched conversation to Doug followed her out into the night. Doug, it's Jodi. Jodi, I know it's you. I recognize your voice, for God's sake. I was going to call you tonight, but I got in late and realized it's already past 10 there, and I didn't want to wake anyone up. Doug, I need to talk to you. I gathered that, Jodi, but let me tell you what I need to say first. I was going to call and tell you I won't be home on Wednesday like I planned. I won't be able to get home until the following Sunday. They have another meeting they want me to go to. Then I have 2 days of training. Jodi knew she was taking a chance interrupting him, but her frustration was bubbling up through her throat and finally erupted like a volcano. Doug, Audra is in the hospital. What did you just say? I said Audra is in the hospital. She has a sprained arm, some bruises, and a concussion. They are holding her overnight for observation. What happened? She says she fell in the dark and hit her head on the wall of the skating rink, but Tony thinks Travis beat her up. What does Tony have to do with this? Tony is called to the scene as a victim's advocate. Why were the police called if she fell and hit her head? Because the doctors, Audra's friends, and Tony don't think that's what happened. They say Travis did it to her, so I guess someone at the rink must have called them. Are you telling me that Audra claims she fell and hit her head, but everyone is accusing Travis of beating her up? He did beat her up. No, Jodi, that is what everyone wants to believe. I, for one, happen to believe my daughter. But Doug, they're saying her injuries are not consistent with someone who fell, but more with someone who has been beaten up. And her friends said they saw Travis drag her outside and left her crying. All that proves is that they had another fight. Jodi, I really can't believe you are bothering me with this. I am in the middle of a very important project, and you call accusing a boy of beating up our daughter without any proof. I am worried that Audra is in the hospital, but I believe her when she says Travis didn't do anything. We've known him for years. Now, is she going to be okay? The doctors think so, yes. Then you need to handle this. I can't take time out of my day to try and take care of things at home, as well as handle the things I need to do here. I am tired of traveling and I want to finish this project. As it is, it looks like I may have to continue to come out here for at least another 3 weeks. But Doug, no, Jodi, I mean it. Handle it and don't bother me with anything like this again unless you have solid proof that Travis hurt our daughter. And for once, why don't you believe her and back her up instead of accusing her boyfriend of something he may or may not have done? As for Toni, I'm sure she's very good at her job, but sometimes I think she sees trouble where there isn't any. Not everyone in a relationship is abusive, you know. But Doug, even if Toni is wrong, the doctors can't be wrong also. Jodi, I said handle it. God, are you completely useless? It was a question he'd asked her several times over the years. Jodi knew it was a rhetorical question, but she gave the same answer as always. No, Doug, she said in her habitually timid fashion. Fine, then I'll call you in a couple of days and check in, and by then I expect everything to be under control. As usual, he hung up with a finality that caused Jodi to jump. She stood in the middle of the room with the receiver in her hand, staring at it like it were a crystal ball, and if she stared at it long enough, she'd be able to make sense of what happened. Jodi slowly hung up the phone, walked to her bedroom, turning off the lights as she went. In the quiet of her room, she climbed into bed, clothes and all, and decisively pulled the covers over her head to block out the blackness of the situation. Inside the soft cotton cave, she prayed its darkness would hide her from the disorder outside. It was moments like this when she felt most crushed from the pressure, sinking deeper and deeper into a pit where air was scarce and where the emotional impact of that moment when she finally hit bottom would be her undoing. Oddly enough, if anyone could look into Jodi's soul, it wasn't the cruelty of Doug's words causing the pressure, but her own guilt from not stopping what she had expected was going on with Audra. What was it Toni had said? I know you've suspected Travis has been abusing Audra for a while now. Yes, she had suspected and had done nothing. Toni was right. It was her fault. She was guilty. Guilty of being a bad mother. Guilty of being weak. Guilty of letting her baby be hurt. The guilt began eating away her insides and making her nauseous, like she'd eaten a rancid piece of meat that didn't want to stay down. Doug was right also. She was useless. She deserved to be rejected by her husband, her father, her children. This thought frightened her so much she came swiftly out from under the protective cocoon of her sheltered cave and took it in big gulps of air. The fear of her family totally rejecting her sent a fear through her blood that paralyzed her mind. She lay in the night with the covers to her chin and stared blankly into space. From an unexplained need and not knowing how long she'd lay in that frozen position, she threw back the covers, got up from the bed, and walked back through her quiet house to the back door and looked out at her garden washed in the glow of a half moon. There was just enough light from the sky to allow her to make out the silhouettes of her flowers bending sadly to the truth of her nature, knowing their heads bent in sorrow just for her. She slowly walked out into the night where a chilled breeze blew across her face. Welcoming the attack on her senses, she stood waiting for the wind to lift her and carry her away. All she had to do was let the panic take her over, let it devour her, let the pressure build until her body could no longer hold itself together and her spirit would be weak enough for the wind to lift her. Then, with extreme relief, it would be over and she would be gone. Clarity smacked her back to reality when a sudden cold gust came out of nowhere and hit her in the face so hard she winced, like God himself was yelling, "No!" Blinking, shaking her head, she too yelled inwardly, "No, no." She wouldn't let the panic take her over. Audra needed her. She had to keep herself from floating away. She looked around, trying to think. There had to be a way to keep herself grounded. She saw it, like a buoy in the sea, the play set. At the top of this toy was the little house with a roof and 4 small walls. It was just large enough to protect her from the spiteful wind, and the roof would keep her from flying away. She half ran to the set, climbed up the 5 rungs of the tiny ladder, and sat cross-legged in the middle of the 5-foot square cabin. She felt this was the answer. But to be on the safe side, she decided she'd better tie herself down so her body was not carried between the support beams over the knee walls, and into the sky. She pulled her belt from the loops of her shorts, tied it to her wrist, and then to the little plastic steering wheel. She laid down, waiting for her pulse to return to normal, convinced she was secure enough to be safe. She closed her eyes and focused on slowing down her breathing. She blinked and blinked and blinked until her eyes closed from sheer exhaustion. She drifted off into a sleep of bad dreams, but at least she slept. Curled into a ball with her left arm stretched above her head and her hand dangling from the wrist, just like the heads of the sad little flowers watching her from her garden, the thought of returning to the house in the safety of her bed never occurred to her. Toni woke from a fitful sleep, feeling heavy-headed, like she always did after having a case that disturbed her. She stood at her kitchen window drinking a glass of water and trying to wash the distaste of sour human behavior from her mouth. She surveyed her yard as she drank, lost in thought. Her house and the Warrens' home were twins of each other, except hers sat on a small rise, which made it possible for her to see into the Warrens' backyard fairly easily. Both houses had the kitchens in the back of the house, where the windows overlooked the trees lining the banks of the Mississippi River, because the architects thought it would reduce the monotony of the mundane chore of doing dishes for the women. So thoughtful of them, she thought contemptuously. She always woke in a mood where she was angry at the world, and particularly men, whenever she had to deal with an innocent girl being victimized by a man. She knew it wasn't fair and sometimes thought she should quit being a victim's advocate before she got to hate all men. She drank the water slowly and looked over the good neighbor fence separating her yard from the Warrens. The welcome sight of bright flowers easing her male-bashing mood. Jodi was so fastidious when it came to her flower garden it made Toni envious. The way she was always puttering around it, Toni thought, it could possibly be the one thing Jodi loved as much as her children. Toni then turned her attention to the monstrosity of Dougie J's playset that dominated the center of the yard. She wondered if Doug was ever going to keep his promise to Jodi and cut down the large branch from the maple tree which scraped the roof of the little cabin. As she stared at the shelter, her attention was interrupted from her musings by an unusual sight, a shoe sticking out of the door of the cabin, a shoe that was too large to be Dougie J's. She set her glass of water down on the counter, tied her robe a little tighter around her waist, and walked out the back door. She walked around the corner of her house, through the gate in her fence, and the 3 feet it took to get to the Warrens' gate. She focused on the blue sandal as she walked toward it, causing curiosity creases in her forehead, something she hated because she was afraid they would become permanent and make her look older than she was, her one vanity vice. She stood at the base of the ladder staring at the shoe and realized it was Jodi's. She knew because she had seen her wearing them the night before. She reached up above her head and grabbed the toe of the shoe, giving it a couple of shakes. "Jodi?" When she didn't get an immediate response, she shook it again. "Jodi, are you okay?" Jodi woke slowly, groggy and disoriented by her sleeping quarters, pointed the shoe that was gently being wiggled. She suddenly sat up quickly. She tried to grab her head, but was stopped when her self-imposed tether jerked her wrist. Looking down, she saw Toni staring up at her and turned to untie herself before Toni saw it. "Toni," she stuttered. "Good morning." "I'll be right down." "Jodi, what are you doing up there? Did you sleep in Dougie J's playset?" "I was just sitting up here last night and must have fallen asleep. I was staring at the stars and got sleepy, I guess. It was as good a lie as any and better than the embarrassment of the truth of her panic attack and the hope of floating away." "I totally get it. I'm just glad it was a warm night." "Yeah, me too." She climbed down the little ladder and straightened her hair when the memory of Audra being in the hospital caused a sharp crease across her forehead. "I'm glad you woke me, Toni. Thanks. I've got to get Audra. Do you want me to stay until the kids wake up in case they wonder where you are?" "That would be so nice. You know, I was thinking that maybe I would like your help in talking to Audra after all. Do you mind if I bring her to your house when I get her home? I really don't know what to say to her." "Of course. I'll talk to Lexi and explain things, and when I see you drive up, I'll come over and we'll talk in my house. It will give Audra some privacy. And don't worry, Jodi. I handle these things all the time. We'll get through to her." "I hope so. I really do, because I'm scared to death for her." Tony had been trying to get Audra to open up for 10 minutes. Audra, I know this is hard, but if you'll just talk to me, I can help. Your mom is worried about you, and frankly, so am I. Audra hadn't said a word, and Tony was getting frustrated. She had seen it too many times before, where the victim would shut down to keep from incriminating the man who hurt her. Please, honey, we only want to help. Tell me how long Travis has been hurting you, Jodi pleaded. If I have to beg, then it's what I'll do. Audra finally spoke up, but only to defend Travis. He didn't hurt me, Mom. How many times do I have to tell you? Audra, I know that's not true. I spoke to your doctors, and you couldn't have gotten your injuries any other way. Why are you protecting him? I'm not. Audra's voice had gone from angry teen to whining adolescent. He isn't doing anything. It was my fault, okay? Listen to me, Audra. Tony knew she had to take control of the situation, so she forced herself to distance her emotions from her friend and let her training take over. I see this kind of thing all the time. You'd be surprised at how many young girls I see every month that are being abused by their boyfriends. You're not alone in this, and you'll feel better if you talk about it. He didn't hurt me. I slipped and fell, Audra almost shouted. The rise in the girl's voice was a positive sign to Tony. In her experience, it meant she was willing to fight. Now the problem was getting her to fight for herself and not Travis. Okay, Audra, let me tell you something and see if any of it sounds familiar. All you have to do is listen. My guess is when you first started dating Travis, he was the sweetest, most attentive boyfriend in the world, and you thought you were the luckiest girl for him wanting to date you. Then, very shortly after you two became exclusive, he started making subtle little insults to you, maybe telling you he didn't like what you were wearing, that it was unflattering or too revealing, and he didn't want the other guys staring at you. It was probably something along these lines, right? Because you didn't want to disappoint him, you started dressing to please him. Audra sat and listened to Tony, subduing her previous outburst. She stared straight ahead as she cradled her injured arm. Well, him dictating what you wore was the first sign of him trying to control you. He probably did this in such a sweet, caring way you didn't even recognize what was happening. After he realized he could control what you wore, he probably began controlling who you talked to or who you could be friends with. Am I right? Audra's eyes shifted from the spot on the wall in front of her to the jumpy look of confusion. He probably started accusing you of intentionally trying to make him jealous and hurt him if you ever talked to other boys, even boys you've known your entire life. So my guess is you stopped talking to many of your friends. Then it started getting worse, didn't it? He began demanding you tell him where you were at all times of the day. You had to answer his calls, meet him between classes, be on time. This was his way of making sure he controlled your every move. Is any of this beginning to sound familiar? Audra shifted her gaze to Tony's face. Then I bet you started hanging out with just his friends. If you objected or wanted to see any of your own friends, he'd get physical with you. Oh, it wasn't anything too serious at first. Maybe a small slap or a little shove, just to see how much you would take. The problem was you were becoming frightened of him, weren't you? Relenting slowly, Audra revealed. He didn't hurt me. I told you it was my fault. Was it always your fault, Audra? Is that what he told you? He didn't mean to hurt you, and he was always so sorry afterward. I shouldn't have made him mad. He didn't mean to hurt me. That's what he wanted you to believe, Audra, that it was always your fault. And I'm sure he was sad afterward, and it sounded sincere. I bet he even cried a few tears, huh? Audra's defenses were beginning to crumble, so Tony pushed a little harder. I'm sure he promised you after every time he hurt you, he'd never do it again, right? He would actually cry. Audra had finally looked Tony in the eyes, tears forming along her lashes. But then it would happen again, wouldn't it? And the time started getting closer together as his temper got worse and worse. It probably got to the point where you never knew what would set him off. Am I right? Yes, okay, it's just I never knew what to do. He'd get so mad at everything. Of course he did, Audra. In my opinion, the more insecure the abuser, the more they try to control. I tried to break it off with him in May, but he said he loved me so much that he couldn't live without me, and that if I left him, he'd do something drastic. He feared he was losing control over you and started using guilt. He wanted you to believe it would be your fault if he did do something drastic. For a while, I bet he stopped hitting you and started being sweet to you again. Just when you thought everything was going to be all right and he felt secure in the relationship again, bam, out of the blue, you did something that set him off and he started hitting you. You probably didn't even know what it was, but it got worse than ever, didn't it? I knew he didn't like me talking to Ryan, but I had to because we were lab partners. I tried to tell him that, but he got so mad. He hit me so hard I couldn't breathe. That's when I tried to break it off with him. Jodi was listening to the conversation with her head in her hands, resting her bent arms on her knees and staring at the floor. Tony knew she was probably in shock. She was numb and didn't know how to react, common for relatives of victims. Tony continued addressing Audra. What is happening, Audra, is his violence is escalating and it's only going to get worse if you don't get away from him. The next time, there is no telling what he might do. If you'll file charges... No, I can't do that. If anyone finds out, I don't know what might happen. He might get kicked off the football team or something. Audra, what's more important, your life or his playing football? It always astounded Tony the length women would go to protect their abusers. Audra's comment finally had Jodi finding her tongue. Audra, if you don't press charges against him, I will. Mom, no, you don't understand. I think it will just make things worse than they are now. If not for him, then for me. Please, don't say anything. I'm going to call his parents and tell them what Travis has been doing to you. Audra, your life is in danger. I see it all the time in my job, and you have got to stop protecting him and start thinking about yourself. You're stronger than that. I know it. No one has a right to hurt you. No one. Turning to her mother, Audra pleaded. Mom, if I promise to break it off with him for good, will you not say anything? Not even to Daddy? I don't know if I can do that, Audra. Tony interjected. Audra, if you promise to break it off with him, then what I can do is call his parents and tell him the legal repercussions of what can happen to him if he doesn't leave you alone. And if he does ever do anything to you again, will you file charges? Is that okay with both of you? Jodi and Audra looked at each other and nodded. The three women talked throughout the morning until their stomachs started complaining loudly from hunger. Around noon, Jodi decided it was time to leave. We're going to go home now, Tony. Thank you so much. Jodi hugged her friend. I'm here if you need me. Turning to Audra, she finished their meeting with what she hoped was something the young girl would think about. Audra, you are a pretty, intelligent girl, and you're not a victim anymore. You have the strength and courage to control your own life. Remember that. You have the strength and self-respect to not let anyone ever hurt you. It's up to you to help yourself, to save yourself. Tony, Audra asked timidly, do you think I'm weak? No, Audra. I think at this moment you're simply confused. But weak? Never. She hugged the young woman and walked her neighbors to her front door. Before they could leave, Jodi turned to Audra and cradled her face. Audra, I'm so sorry I didn't see what was happening. I suspected something was going on, but didn't do anything to stop it. I'm your mother. I should have seen you in trouble and helped you. Can you ever forgive me? Mom, there was no way for you to have known. I kept it hidden pretty well. Besides, you wouldn't know what to do anyway because you've never been abused. You married Daddy, the perfect man who would never hit you. You've never been a victim. God, it hurts to admit that I am. Audra hugged her mother as Tony watched an uneasy, confused look cross Jodi's face, disappearing almost as fast as it came on. No, Jodi said with a flinch. Your father would never hit me. This time it was Tony's turn to be confused. The way Jodi reacted to Audra's statement, something was going on with the Warren family, but she didn't know what. Tony watched as Jodi and Audra walked back to their home, arm in arm. She stood, watching, contemplating, unsettled, unreasonably achy, like an invading virus was slowly clawing its way into her gut. How far does someone go to intrude in someone's life if you're not asked? She asked herself as she gently closed her front door and went back inside. That is the end of 18. It was a little long, but it was, I wanted to put it in as a very typical discussion when someone is being abused, and hope that if someone recognizes it, know that they're not alone in how they feel about protecting the abuser, both men and women. So I apologize that it was a little long, but I do think it was an important chapter. Thank you, and I will see you later. Bye.